Welcome everybody to another episode of Same Storm, Different Boat. We've gone offshore today. We're talking to two of our Australian friends, Mr. Tom Stevens and Kim Cousins. They are Little River Band's legal representation in Australia, and we are very interested to hear their take on how Australia is reacting to the whole coronavirus situation from a governmental standpoint, from a human standpoint, etc. So from 8,000 miles away, hello to Tom and Kim.
Hello to you.
Hello.
Good
Thanks
to
for
see
having
you.
us.
So first question. In our country, our federal government has chosen to treat this as a state issue, not as a localized federal issue. There's a lot of controversy about should there be more federal hands in the pot here, but they have staunchly left it to states to decide what they're going to do on individual bases. They have ended up competing for protective equipment and other things, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. So my question to you guys is, what is the Australian government, what is their outlook on how to handle the issue in your country?
Kim, I'll take this question.
Thanks, Tom.
It really is a constitutional question as to the powers which are actually specifically given to the federal, in America, the Congress, in Australia, the federal parliament. We have a constitution which is very much modelled on the United States Constitution. All residual powers rest with the state. If a power is not specifically given to the federal parliament or Congress in the United States, then it's reserved to the states. Now, we have a history over the last couple of hundred years of powers being usurped by the central government, very gradually but quite consistently. In the United States, there's a great raging argument over the issue of the central government taking power, and the federalists trying to say these are state issues, we should not have the states intruding on such matters as health. And in Australia, we have no federal power given to the central government over health. There is an enormous encroachment by the central government into state health issues by the use of the Treasury, by saying, okay, we will allocate money to the states for health reasons as long as you do what we tell you to do. And in Australia, what's happened is that the federal government exercises a great deal of power over state health issues. And the federal government, Kim, I think you'll agree, in this particular case, has exercised the lead role in what's been happening. It has said to some extent, oh, these are state issues and these are our policies, but it's up to the states to implement them. And the states have pretty well fallen into line with what the federal government has said. For instance, we have issues relating to financial relief for tenants, whether they're residential tenants or commercial tenants. And they've said, these are our policies, we're formulating the policies, but it's up to the individual states to legislate to give those policies legislative or enact laws which actually enforce them. It's a bit of a difference between here and the United States and a place like Sweden, where there's legislative controls been brought in on what we call, Kim, it's distancing between individuals. You can't
That's right,
get
social distancing measures.
Yeah. In Sweden, they've said, we would like you to keep your distance, but they haven't brought in any any laws to enforce it. They haven't said, oh, if you get too close to each other, we're going to fine you. We have a situation in Australia which is so ridiculous that we have a woman sitting on a park bench eating a sandwich overlooking the ocean by herself, and she gets fined over $1,000 because she's not exercising. You're allowed to go out and go on the Esplanade cans and exercise by walking or whatever, but you can't sit on a park bench and have a sandwich by yourself. It's absolutely ridiculous. The encroachment on individual liberties is just beyond the pale. It is, in my humble opinion, just ridiculous.
Was that
in any event?
Did that occur in Queensland? Just curious.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's occurring all over the state. You have in the state of Victoria, mum and daughter driving in a car. The daughter is driving the car. She's got a learner's permit. She's trying to get up the number of hours that she has to have to get her full license. And they get pulled over by the police and fined because they're on a non-essential journey. Fined over $1,000.
Wow.
Now, that sort of thing is, to me, abhorrent. I don't know whether other people would agree, but certainly that's my view.
Well, I have to say, having been to Australia so much, that shocks me that there is that much that tight a lockdown on everyone. Our businesses are closed and we can go do essential things like groceries or whatever, but we're not restricted from walking somewhere or hiking the trails here or whatever. We put on masks when it makes sense. But that is shocking to me that it's that strict in Australia. I've experienced living in both countries for long periods of time. Truly taken back by that report. That's amazing.
Our parks, and even when New York started to see warmer temperatures, the parks were just flooded with people. And we took a drive a couple of Sundays ago, and there's some lakes that are near us, about 15 minutes. And even though the entrances were blocked, people were parking on the side of the road and they were walking down to them, but they weren't fining people for being out and about and doing that kind of thing. But on the reverse of that, what you mentioned about that you guys have for commercial and residential tenants, there's structure in place that they get reprieve from their monies owed every month. Here, it's just the opposite. They haven't said anything about that other than maybe you want to consider being nice to your tenant and not require them to pay rent. But there's no reprieve for those people. Whereas people who have a mortgage on a home or a building, they can deal directly with their mortgage company and they're able to get reprieves that way. But our renters are kind of out of luck, so to speak, with any help.
That doesn't surprise me. That's consistent with the way tenants have been treated by English law, which is applied in the United States as well. It's always been on the side of the landlord. We have legislation in Australia which tries to protect retail tenants and residential tenants, but commercial tenancies, as in office buildings, they're not protected at all. But nevertheless, we do have legislation in place or about to be in place in Queensland. It's been enacted in New South Wales. This is based on the federal policy, which is designed to protect tenants. But on the other side of the coin is that many tenants are using this as an invitation not to pay rent. To stop paying rent altogether. So how do you get the balance?
Right.
We have a building in which our office is situated, where we also have a restaurant downstairs, and our tenants are Korean. They've got a Korean restaurant, so they're very nice people. And as soon as this dreadful catastrophe happened, we knew that they were not going to be able to pay their rent. So we've just said, rent holiday for you until things change, until you can get back to operating your business. We have next door to us on the upper level, we have one of our very best clients, which is a travel agency book tour desk business, which is the largest in Australia. Their head office here is in Cairns. This is where they do their administration. They have about 40 outlets around New Zealand and Australia, and their business is in mothballs. The managing director happens to be in New York, would you believe? And we have a very good, close relationship with this company, and they've had to close down their entire operation throughout Australia and New Zealand, and so we don't expect them to pay rent.
Yeah.
At the same time, we also have a very good, understanding bank manager, don't we, Kim? Happens to be Kim's
That's
husband.
correct. Yes.
She's a very important person to us.
I've seen
Absolutely.
a little nepotism there in the office.
Yeah.
Well, it's been working for hundreds of years, if not thousands. So we just continue it. So,
Yes.
but the bank has, it's not just our bank; it's all banks have been very understanding about the situation with business people, and also private borrowers, and have extended the terms of loans and given us interest and principal repayment holidays for a short period of time. It's not going to be indefinite, but I think it started at 6 months just to help us get through. After all, the banking industry in Australia has copped a terrible hiding over the last couple of years with royal commissions into the behaviour of banks and the way they treat their customers, to the extent now that it's almost impossible to get a bank to make a decision in regard to their customers' relations, because they were afraid they're going to make a mistake.
Right.
But yeah, as far as our position in Australia is concerned, our firm has really taken a massive hit from the fact that 90% of my clients, Kim's clients, I don't think I'm exaggerating, either in the tourist industry, travel agencies, tour operators, or the music industry or entertainment industry. 90% of them are in mothballs, and that means that our source of income, our major source of income, is completely dried up. At the same time, last month was one of the best months we've ever had. That was because of historical stuff, and we are still busy, unlike other law firms where everybody's working from home and overreacting to the situation. Many people getting laid off, stood down, unemployed. The ivory tower firms in the capital cities really starting to become paranoid. Our firm's operated as usual. We haven't had to put off anybody.
Wow.
We're still busy day to day with different types of work. With companies getting into financial trouble, you have requests for assistance in regard to how to deal with the problems that arise as a result of their businesses being put on hold, or dealing with lenders, dealing with landlords. And we're sort of in the process of reinventing ourselves for the time being, in the hope that it all gets back to normal in the not too distant future, which I think it will.
You guys, I think, here in America, as this came on, our schools were in the last part of their year. But you guys, your children, I think, are headed back into school. Is that right? At this point?
The major holidays that we have in Australia for schools is around Christmas. We have 6 or 7 weeks. We're in the middle of the year. Many schools, if not all schools, have ceased to operate. Is that right, Kim?
That's my understanding is that the majority of schools are operating remotely, but they're still allowing children to attend where their parents are working in essential services and are unable to assist their children to learn remotely from home. And I believe each school and each state are dealing with it slightly differently, but generally speaking, that is what the present state of affairs is. And I think it was, I haven't been following it closely the last week or so, but I think we were in Queensland, we were in a period of about a 5-week period where the students were going to be working remotely and at school remotely as well. So for example, I have an acquaintance who has children in a small town near Cairns, and so there is a school ranging from grade 1 right through to the year 12, so primary school and high school, and they have 2 classes of 10 students all doing their work remotely, but they have 3 teachers assisting them in each classroom. And then we have the situation of parents at home trying to work or not working, but also assisting their students trying to do their remote learning. And then different states have been discussing what may happen next term, preparing to still work remotely, preparing for students to come back. And I believe it's in a state of flux at the moment.
Right.
I feel,
we had a great discussion a couple of days ago with a friend of mine that I went to high school with, and his partner. She was a school principal as well. And just talking about the influence of online learning, the wide range of different experiences that the kids will have, because we all assume that kids are techie and are going to learn quickly and so on and so forth. And some aren't. Some they have never had the tools to do what's being required. Subsequent to that, just the last couple of days, we found out there are college students here in the US that are now suing their universities because the online experience isn't up to par with what it was when they were going to class in person, and they want their money back. And of course, the schools are pushing back on that. Any trend like that in Australia from universities?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that we get lots of communications from Melbourne University Law School, where I went, and where Kim is just enrolled in a master's degree in intellectual property.
Congratulations.
And there doesn't seem to be that sort of problem here. In regard to the school issue, the only personal contact or experience that I've had is I have a 17-year-old granddaughter who lives in country Victoria in a place called Windaree, which is a suburb of Ballarat. Do you know Ballarat, Wayne? Have you been there?
Yeah. If you remember the name David Hirschfelder, our keyboard player with John Farnham, is a Ballarat native. Yes, well, I know.
He's a Ballarat native. I know David. I've acted for David, and we're friends. And he introduced me to David Hobson, the opera singer,
right,
who's also a Ballarat boy. And anyway, my granddaughter lives next to Lake Windaree, is where in 1956 we had the Olympics in Australia, and where all the water sports were held on Lake Windaree, which is about an hour's drive from Melbourne. And my daughter Ruby, she lives by herself. She's lived by herself for years, having rejected both parents, including my son. They didn't just live up to their expectations, apparently. So she's been living by herself, and she's got a one-bedroom apartment in premises which are managed, so she's got security, but she's by herself doing homeschooling. How lonely can that be? I really do feel sorry for her.
Yeah.
I keep in regular contact, and we usually have a few emails a week, and she comes across as being okay, but I know she's not.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that she can get back to school very soon.
Yeah. You guys just earlier, the fires destroyed millions of acres. It was a horrific situation. And then on the heels of that, the virus hits. And while some areas were beginning to recover from the fires, what's it like in those areas that were hardest hit from the fires and then now dealing with the virus? I mean, is it just complete devastation to those areas, or what's going on in those areas?
My experience living in Australia in bushfire prone areas is that when it happens, it's absolutely devastating. I recall driving through massive forests which were absolutely just black. Everything was black. And yet going back there, only a matter of 6 to 8 weeks, this green foliage coming out of the trees. It's amazing how they survive. Australian forests are used to fires. They've been set on fire for 60,000 years by Australian Aborigines who, if they want to do some hunting, they just set the forest on fire. Come and pick up the animals afterwards. And I'm not joking, that's how it was done. The resilience of Australian forests and their ability to recover from these absolute disastrous fires is really remarkable. And those areas that we're talking about, the vast majority of them have had incredibly good rains ever since. And so you wouldn't even know that the fires have been there.
If I could just perhaps add there, thank you for that question about the bushfires, and in addition to what Tom has said, we have, as Australians, really overwhelmed by and appreciate the support that we've received around the world, and with donations and initiatives that we've seen happening in New York, like the koalas around the streets. And as Tom said, in perspective, these kind of tragedies have happened in Australia over the years in significant proportions, and so it's not the first time that something like that has happened, and it was hugely significant in the international media, I agree, but we really appreciate the support that has been provided internationally, and Australians really came together and also raised a lot of money to support the people affected by the bushfires, and there have been some difficulties with getting that money to the right areas, and because of the coronavirus and that being so prevalent in the media now, we haven't seen a lot of what has been happening in those communities and how they are going. But because there have been a lot of government assistance programs because of coronavirus and COVID-19, those communities may be benefiting in some ways if they're able to be qualifying for some of the benefits that are available, even though the bushfires happened prior to the coronavirus epidemic. So we'll see how they're going in time, but at the moment, coronavirus is still dominating the media.
Yeah.
Well, I will, as an aside to that, I just, Little River Band fans were extremely moved by the reports that I would let them know at shows before we had to stop having shows, but we actually raised some funds for the koala rescue and for the volunteers who had lost their lives, the families of the volunteers. So on a personal level, the LRB fans chipped in quite well for us to send some funds over there. We heard the report of just shy of 1 billion animals had been lost, and who could go count them, of course, but just an estimate of that. So the LRB fans jumped in. They were quite generous in that regard. So
it was a fantastic initiative. Yes. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
The other thing that I should note is that historically the United States has always, as far as I can recall, assisted Australia with regard to bushfire fighting, and has sent aircraft specifically designed for the purpose of fighting bushfires.
right.
And I remember one was called Elvis. And in the last bushfires, Kim, you might correct me here, but my recollection is one of the aircraft crashed, and 4 American pilots, or probably all pilots, but anyway, 4 personnel were killed in that crash fighting Australian bushfires.
Right. Yeah. We're going to run out of time here in a second because of the Zoom restrictions. But one last question: our healthcare systems are so different, and just wondering, some of our medical facilities, again, because of all that localized chaos that hit early on, ran out of equipment, people in the hallways. How has Australia's healthcare system handled the onslaught of victims? Have any of them been overwhelmed like some of ours were, or has your system handled it in a much more methodical way?
We've taken a great deal of care to prepare for the worst. In Cairns, our hospitals are half full, or 40% capacity, because of the care that was taken to ensure that such things as non-essential medical treatment did not occur. It was postponed, and one might even think that there was over-preparation. To my knowledge, we have not had a problem dealing with the problem from a medical perspective at all. After all, our numbers are very much lower than the percentages in the United States. Our health system in Australia is certainly equal to, if not better than, Canada's. We have the most magnificent health system. I was born in Queensland and I grew up here as a young fellow. I never went to a doctor. If you were sick, you went to the hospital. It was free. Your medicines were free. Everything was free. It was all funded through that wonderful idea of having lotteries. We introduced the golden casket, it was called. And I think it happened about 1948. And it was just a marvellous scheme. When I moved to Victoria, when I was in my late teens and then had children in the early 1970s, and I went off to the hospital and they gave me a bill, I said, "You've got to be joking. What are you going to do? Keep me prisoner until I pay? I haven't got the money." And they said, "Oh, well, you can pay us off at $5 a month. Thanks very much." But all Australia has now got a very good medical system, and we simply do not have the problems that are faced by the United States in regard to healthcare. I read about it all the time because I happen to be on the mailing list for the Lighthouse Institute from San Francisco, and that they're always banging on about the health system and how badly it's managed and how Obamacare is never going to work and whatever. It's an interesting subject, certainly from the perspective of the United States and how it's viewed by other countries throughout the world. no one can believe that the United States has got one of the worst health systems in the world. How can it be? How can that happen? It's the most wealthy, successful country which does not have a decent healthcare system.
Well, nor can many Americans believe that America doesn't have a better health system than it does. That's
We could take some lessons.
yeah, we could, and we could talk for hours on.
You just got to spend some money.
But I'm glad to hear that you guys are well prepared, well cared for, and that your numbers are low. That's a perspective that we wanted to get to, because what irked Rhonda was that we're all in the same boat, and we know we're not. Gratifying to hear that you guys are safe and well. And I want to thank you for juggling your IT department down there to get laptops ready to do this meeting. And it was just an absolute pleasure to talk to you and to meet you finally for the first time. So thanks, many, many thanks. And you guys take good care.
Thank you guys so much. It was nice to meet you both. I've heard all about you, and now I have a name and a face.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lovely to speak to you over video.
Same to you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.